ladies to open it.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much
And
for having us, for having me.
thank you. Thank you for making the time. And we are up in five. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today as we talk about ICE. ICE. They have been in Chicago, and it has been a battle royale, as everyone has seen. And it seems that people all around the country are taking note of how Chicagoans fought back. And indeed, I've been reading different articles, and people in North Carolina are saying, well, you know what, we need to look to Chicago and how they organized and how they pushed back. Let that guide us through this moment. And let us find out why a non border city and a non border state has a military deployment. I can't help but separate it from this time in which we have so much going on that could promote social tumult. We have 41 or 42 million families money for food. And if you miss a paycheck or a pay period, let alone two, you're already behind. We are looking at threats to healthcare. The healthcare system, even though ACA made advancements, the leading driver of bankruptcy in the United States, well, it is your healthcare costs. With the best insurance, you could go broke at any point in your life trying to get or stay well. What does that say about us? Let me put it this way. The largest, wealthiest business in the world, if you can count a government as such, is the United States government. So it would stand to reason that the oligarchs would want to pick it apart and get these profitable ventures, the post office, the library system, on and on and on and on and on, but none more profitable than our military system. And for what? Think about that. Think of all the money that we pour into the military and what it could do if we just poured a portion of that into education, into healthcare. Just keep on going with that. Housing for everybody. There's enough for everybody to live a decent life in the United States. But our priorities, well, that's not where they are. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and those numbers are growing at the bottom. So I reached out to someone for whom I have enormous respect. She's a research analyst at the National Priorities Project. They really help us to wrap our minds and money, wrap our minds around our money. We understand just how much we are spending. You know, when you really want to develop a budget, when you look at how much money you spend, you will be shocked how much money we've allotted to the military as opposed to education, as opposed to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about these military deployments. We've become increasingly militarized, especially since 9/11. When you get to the airport, you automatically take off your shoes, take off your clothes, spread them. I didn't grow up like that. And General Dwight Eisenhower, when he became president, he was salute. He said, no, this is a civilian society. I don't salute. I'm no longer a general. I'm the president of the United States. I'm his boss. So let's talk about this because I think we need to understand just the implications. What did he say? Material and spiritual of the militarization of America. So I bring to you Hannah Homestead, the National Priorities Project of the Institute for Policy Studies. I bring you all on all the time. I had Chuck Collins on the other week as we're talking about these billionaires who are hoarding our wealth. And they get wealthy off of us because they get government contracts. That's very important. But welcome to the show, Hannah Homestead. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Santita. I'm well under all the circumstances. I'm grateful to be well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. everyone. Just very quickly, great update. My father's out of ICU. I just saw that as a headline in the news, and he was transferred last night, and he is recovering very, very nicely, very steadily, and we're very, very happy and blessed and boosted by your prayers. I know that your prayer changes things, and we thank you uh, for being so kind and being so hopeful, pouring the hope into him that he has poured into you all these years. Hannah Homestead, when we look at these military deployments now, uh, they're not going to Texas. The administration is going to North Carolina, Charlotte. It is not a border state. It's not a border city. It's not a border state. One cannot help but wonder what is really going on here. So, and you see, Charlotte is already reacting. So take it away, Hannah.
Well, it's such an honor
I
to
mean,
be
they
here.
are saying, get out of my town.
Yeah. And it's such an honor to be here and just so appreciate all of your work and highlighting this critical issue. As you've said, deploying troops around the country rather than investing in what makes our communities actually safe and prosperous is ultimately just another attempt to scapegoat struggling people, to scapegoat Black communities, scapegoat immigrants, to advance a draconian agenda that's really in service of billionaires, war profiteers, and white supremacy, as you said. Our team at the National Priorities Project, in collaboration with Nick Turth, who's a journalist at The Intercept, actually just put together a roundup of the costs of all of these military National Guard deployments currently underway in 5 cities across the United States, and found the total spending since June 7th to be $473 million. So in less than 6 months, spending $500 million to militarily occupy American cities in an unprecedented scale that hasn't been seen before. And as you mentioned, there's also huge federal crackdowns on immigration happening all across the United States. And these things are also not separate from the National Guard deployments. In August, the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, released a memo targeting sanctuary cities across the United States. It targeted specific states, counties, and I believe it was 18 cities that they said that they were going to be looking at specifically because they say those sanctuary cities are impeding the Trump administration's ability to carry out its illegal, inhumane, and draconian immigration enforcement policy. And of course, lo and behold, Chicago is on the list, Portland is on the list, LA is on that list. So we see this deployment of National Guard to cities under this guise of instilling public safety and security, when we know it does the exact opposite. We know the Trump administration and the MAGA regime is in the middle of cutting benefits and social spending, as you pointed out, that actually do make our communities safer, and instead spend that money on sending troops into the streets to intimidate people that are pushing back against this draconian mass deportation agenda, and to really instill fear in people that we shouldn't be fighting authoritarianism as they're avidly expanding that kind of work in our streets. And so we saw that the courts, this has been the deployment of the National Guard domestically has been being fought in courts. And just over the weekend, the Pentagon announced that they actually are going to be sending some troops home from Portland and from Chicago. Those were troops that Trump had sent from Texas Texas to Chicago, and then some troops from California into Oregon. And those were contested in court. Of course, we know Governor Newsom in California had sued earlier this year the Trump administration about the Title X deployment of troops in California, saying there's no national emergency that you need to deputize troops here in LA. And the court sided with Governor Newsom, saying there's no reason to deputize these troops under federal law. There's no public safety reason. So we see now the Trump administration backing down on that and sending some of those troops he had sent from other states to states that didn't want those troops. So that's one place we see a little bit of progress. But like you said, in other parts of the country, including Charlotte, we're seeing massive increase in ICE and immigration and federal agencies that are being deputized to work on the mass deportation strategy expanding, and also talks now too of sending the National Guard to places like Charlotte, ultimately to enforce and help accelerate this really horrendous agenda.
But why Charlotte? Help me to understand what is really going on here, because Charlotte is not Chicago. You do have, first of all, we're in the part of the country where you really do grow a lot of food. We grow the food. Of course, you do that in the South, but in North Carolina, while you do have farming communities, it's a big university state. It's rural, but it's urbanized. It's not. It's a very different place, and it's not where you're going to find the significant um, brown population that they are allegedly looking for. Why Charlotte? What are they doing? I mean, it's
You
not.
know,
It's not a border. People are not coming in. I mean, it's just how would they get there? What?
it's not a coincidence, I think, that the Trump administration is targeting Democratic strongholds in Republican-led states with these immigration, with also troops and immigration enforcement. This is something that the mass deportation strategy and the fear mongering around immigrants is something that is extremely catalyzing and energizing for the MAGA base. It's a way to deflect away from the actual people who are causing harm in our society, who are causing job loss, who are causing our healthcare to be unaffordable, who are causing our wages to be stagnant. The billionaires and corporations that have outsized political influence in our political system. Instead of focusing on those, the MAGA base is very good at distracting their base and saying it's immigrants' fault. They're the ones that are the problem, and we need to have this kind of draconian militarized regime in order to keep you safe. And so it's not a coincidence that they're using this to target Democratic cities that are in red states, again, under this guise of public safety. But really what it is about social control, about normalizing troop and military presence, and about instilling fear in folks so that the public is less willing to fight back against authoritarianism. And on the spending on this, so earlier this year, the big bad bill, which we've heard about, the big billionaires bill, of course, Trump called it the big beautiful bill. We don't use that term to describe it, but that bill enacted $170 billion for mass deportation over the next 4 years. It's hard to describe how huge that number is. It includes $45 billion for expanded detention capacity, $30 billion for ICE specifically. And it brings the budget for detention facilities to about $14 billion a year, tripling the current budget. And my colleague at the National Priorities Project, Lindsay Kashgarian, has written on this, showing that if immigration enforcement, if the apparatus that was funded was its own national military, it would be the 13th largest military in the world. So the spending on mass deportation is huge. And we're actually just, unfortunately, just sad to say, we are in year one. This is at least $43 billion a year for the next 4 years. We're in year one. So we're going to see the Trump administration and the MAGA regime be deploying this money and these resources to communities throughout the country, as we've been seeing in Chicago and now, in Charlotte and in many places. These efforts are unfortunately going to be continually ramping up. And we will also, the Trump regime has stated that they are likely to continue to deploy National Guard to places where they expect to see resistance to this agenda.
Well, is policy is policy giving way to the money, or is money giving way to the policy? It just seems that that's an extraordinary amount of money. And military contractors, your research has shown, they're the ones who make the money. The enlistees, they don't make money. They're payday loan centers on the edges of these bases.
It's
Who's making this money? What is going on here?
so in that the big bad bill, it was $170 billion for mass deportation and $156 billion for the Pentagon, including $100 billion for the Pentagon, or including $1 billion within that for the Pentagon to help with mass deportation, counter drug policies. The Pentagon bill itself this year, including that 156 billion, is going to be over $1 trillion, which is a staggering amount of money for the military. And as you mentioned, at least half of that budget goes to for-profit military contractors that make money through weapons procurement and development, through services for the military, and ultimately are profiting off of endless war, both abroad, as we see also the Trump administration, going ahead with these illegal strikes against targets, Venezuelan targets, and moving military personnel and equipment into the South American theater, and prompting another conflict in that region. As we're seeing that happen with impunity, we're also seeing, again, the deployment of troops on our own streets for the enforcement of this mass deportation policy, which also is enriching private contractors here as well. The detention facilities, there's a whole apparatus around surveilling and detaining and doing all sorts of work around with folks that aren't a lot of these immigrants that are being targeted don't even have criminal records, right? There was a bill passed earlier this year, the Laken Riley Act, that authorized the use of detention even if folks don't have a criminal record. And that unfortunately was passed with bipartisan support. Both Democrats and Republicans voted for that bill. So we are seeing we're seeing both legislatively authorization, we're seeing budgets being passed, we're seeing Congress not stepping up. Congress could have, for example, the War Powers Act voted to say, your Trump administration, you're not allowed to spend any more money bombing boats in Venezuela without any kind of legal recourse. They did not do that. They also voted down an amendment to say, like, ICE agents can't hide their faces. They voted down many different policies that would have helped bring more accountability to this process, as well as, of course, authorizing the budgets that are doing that. So there is a major issue around our political leaders really being out of touch and really being under influenced by a lot of these for-profit companies that are earning money from these really horrific policies.
I want to drill down on the numbers with you because they're extraordinary. Before, as I bring up Attorney Darrell Jones from the Transformative Justice Coalition, I want him to hear this because he and Barbara Arnwine do so much work in the voter space. I mean, indeed, they're at the vanguard of that. And there's something that Congressman Charlie Rangel, may rest in peace, called the poverty draft. And we bring all these people in, poor people enlist. The wealthier kids go to Annapolis, they go to West Point. Let's just be very honest about that. And there is a class divide in the military, and it breaks your heart because we're asking people to go overseas and guard an oil facility. I have been on trips with Reverend Jackson and I have seen it. I'm like, what is the military are here protecting the contractors? The contractors are making six figures. They're barely getting by. And their families have to apply for SNAP and WIC. But I'm not digressing, I'm progressing. I quote from you, in 2024, the average taxpayer paid more than $3,800 for the Pentagon and deportations and border militarization. It's astonishing, absolutely. But then when you broke down what we spend on education and all of these other areas, Attorney Jones, it is stunning. And I think it's a profound insult to Americans. Could you talk about that, Hannah?
Yes. Well, you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the military does have an extremely predatory recruitment process where, like you said, they go into poor communities. They highlight communities with higher use of SNAP funding and things like that in order to go in and target people, as you said, that are already struggling to get by, and then offering them what they say as this path to upward mobility. And so you're exactly right. We see endless funding for the Pentagon rather than for things in our communities that would keep people safe, and that are used as like this bargaining chip to kind of coerce people to even go into military service. So, for example, even in 2024, we spent nationally 4 times more on on the Pentagon, or as they've renamed it aptly now, actually the Department of War, than the Department of Education. And so when you see kind of like the outcomes, we're again kind of getting what we pay for here. If we're funding the Pentagon and we're underfunding everything else, that is not what is creating safety in our community.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but everything else, these numbers were astonishing because I think as we're looking at, just where we want to go, what we want to do as a nation, we're looking at our budget crunch. We've got 30+ trillion dollars in debt. If I had children, they wouldn't be able to pay it. It's unsustainable. But you went on to say $787 per person for the Department of Education, 149 for the National Institutes of Health, $120 for school lunch and nutrition programs. Hannah, what does this say? National priorities. What do you say about that? What does that say about our society?
Well, this we clearly are living in a militarized economy in every sense of the term. And those numbers you said, I also too want to say the 170 billion that was passed for the mass deportation agenda is actually more than the following combined. The 170 billion for mass deportation is more than the Environmental Protection Agency, for school lunch programs, for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, for Head Start, for international climate aid, and for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, all combined. So, like you said, we are seeing such skewed priorities that are being funded by our leaders in government. This massively has to do too with corruption at the federal level. The fact that we have there's too much money in politics. And also the fact that our country's really, it's being funded around a war economy. And that's really how many elites in office and many folks that are in charge of our national security see security. They see it as a militarized, we should be the most militarized force in the world, that everything is might makes right. But again, we're seeing kind of how that's playing out in the global, supporting genocidal regimes, and then with massive inequality at home, higher than it's ever been, and also massive unhappiness. Folks in this country are not happy. We're not optimistic about the future. We have climate crisis looming as well, and of course, we know that the Pentagon and the wealthy elites in general are responsible for the climate crisis and mass planetary disruptions, which we're going to be seeing more and more. Ironically too, the National Guard deployments to militarize our streets that we're seeing right now are also taking away resources from our programs that are supposed to be helping communities in the midst of climate crisis and climate disasters. And so all of these things are happening simultaneously and kind of enforcing each other. So it's kind of what folks call a polycrisis, right? There's so many different crises happening at once. But we are also seeing folks fighting back there's historic turnout for real progressive policy change happening that we saw in the last election. We've been seeing people fighting back, communities all over the place, saying that they don't want troops on our street. We want to protect our neighbors and our immigrant neighbors. And we want our money spent on public goods that we need and demand and deserve, not on endless militarization. So it does seem like there's been a movement, a real upswell in that movement as fascism we know it's colonialism abroad coming home. It's kind of the impact of our militarized foreign policy over the last many decades, we're seeing now reverberating back at home. But we're also seeing folks trying to really gather together and fight back against that.
Well, Hannah Homestead, I want to bring Attorney Darrell into this because, when you're asking people to vote, I think Americans are moving into a space where we're asking more questions. Mm-hmm. But I have the feeling, well, let me stay with you for a hot second, Anna. If we saw a line, the line item vetoes that they do when they're budgeting on Capitol Hill, I think Americans would feel very differently if they were able to do a line item accounting of who gets the monies in the government, who the contractors are. I mean, how much money Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, and these are just the names that we know, how much money the billionaires, really, and multimillionaires, how much money people can make, those in business, their pivot is to the government. That's because that's where the money is. I mean, do you think that we would feel this if we saw how much money was going to military spending? Do you think we'd call for peace?
Absolutely.
Hannah?
I mean, yeah, and especially, we're coming out two decades of these wars on terror, that didn't make anyone any safer, only benefited contractors, killed millions of people throughout the Middle East, destroyed many soldiers, left many of our troops, like you said, that were enlisted, traumatized, and many more soldiers we know have died of suicide even than died in combat in those fields. So really just traumatizing all around for everyone. And what do we have to show for that after 2 decades? Massive inequality, massive growing poverty, trauma, and we have an oligarchic government that is continuing to solidify their power and control over our lives to the detriment of all of our communities and to the planet. And I think you're right. If folks knew, we did some trade-offs on these National Guard deployments as well, and saw that in DC, sending troops to occupy Washington, D.C. costs 4 times more than actually just housing on the entire unhoused population there. And these are things that, across the political spectrum, folks agree on. If we're paying taxes, we should be getting back services that actually benefit us, not corporations, not Elon Musk. We need to get better at breaking through the propaganda that these oligarchs are very effective at spreading, that really are turning us on our neighbors, that are using racism, that are using nationalism to demonize each other, when instead we should be, and we need to be, banding together more to really target who are the drivers of violence at home and abroad. It's the same kinds of war profiteers and billionaires that are, at the root of the occupation of our cities here, the deportation agenda, the poverty, the genocides abroad, whether they're in Sudan, whether they're in Palestine, wherever they be. It's the same groups that are profiting. Meanwhile, the rest of us are all suffering.
Well, Attorney Darrell Jones, this is as good a place as any to bring you in, because we have been having this conversation in the context of ICE going to Charlotte. Mm-hmm. Charlotte. Mm-hmm. Los Angeles, okay. Chicago, all right. But Charlotte, wait a minute, and not Texas, and the border states, not New Mexico. I mean, nothing on the border.
Hmm.
And I'm not so sure, what this all means, because I feel like we're being, it's social conditioning. It feels like to me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, we are moving. We are adapting a military stance, Attorney Jones.
Well, Santita, yeah, good afternoon. And Hannah, hello. Thank you for that excellent analysis. It's 100% on point. Santita, you're right on point because, what is being attempted is that you have a regime that is trying to normalize fear, and they want people to simply be afraid of the Custom Border Patrol and the National Guard and everyone they're putting in place. They want you to remain in place. They want you to be afraid so that they can continue. Because once they have you afraid and then you're not acting, then they're going to continue pushing forward to keep you in place so that they can do whatever they want to do, whenever they want to do it, wherever they want to do it. One of the things that I am so happy to report back, I think today, is that when they left Chicago, they didn't leave Chicago in victory. They left Chicago in defeat. And Santita, previously, we've had the discussion where we said Chicago really was going to be a blueprint as to how other areas will act and react to what's going on. And I think that what the Customs and Border Patrol and what ICE experienced in Chicago was such a pushback from the people that they weren't having it, that they were going to, video the folks. They were going to stand up for their neighbors. They were going to do all that they could to protect their city. And I think it's a blueprint for what's going forward. Interestingly, I'm out of the DMV, right? And DC, of course, is under occupation with the National Guard. Do you remember Subway Guy, right? Subway Guy was another part of fighting back from the community. What do I mean by that? Not simply that the guy, and he was fighting back with the National Guard when he threw the sub at the guy, right? Sub at the officer, National Guardsman, because he didn't believe that the guy should be in the community, shouldn't be going after his neighbors, not knowing who he was going after, nor their status as they were going after them. Well, there's a larger part to this too, right? The larger part to it is that the citizens of the District of Columbia have said, not only will we, Mr. President, you may have the power to pardon, but we have the power to say not guilty. And that's what they did to the Subway Guy. That's a form of fighting back. They're like, look, no, if you can pardon these people that we know are criminals, we're going to pardon our people that are fighting back against an unlawful occupation. So I think that as this moves along, you're going to see more communities coming together. The one thing that I always say, Santita, and I'll continue to say and say it and say it and say it again, is that fear is contagious, right? People get fearful and it just spreads like a wildfire. But similarly, courage is contagious. So the more people see courage and see neighbors stepping up for neighbors, friends stepping up for family, and all of this that occurs, stepping up against ICE, stepping up against Customs and Border Patrol, pulling their phones out saying, I'm going to record this, I'm going to document this. It's not going to stop here. The more we see that happening, the greater the chances of lowering what's happening with this regime and the efforts they're taking. Rest assured, Charlotte has taken notes with regards to what has happened in Chicago, what has happened in DC, and I'm at a conference right now with folks from North Carolina, and they have indicated that they're online talking to these folks from Chicago and from DC and from some of the other areas to implement those strategies to fight back. So that's a large part of what we're seeing, and I think that Hannah was 100% on point when she said, as we're moving toward this deeper election season in 2026, I think the one thing that the regime doesn't want to see is the courage that's being built up, because the courage that's being built up means it's against what they're trying to do and suppressing people from getting access to the ballots and being able to vote. The more people have the access and the courage to go out and say, I don't like this, I don't like seeing $170 billion sent on deportation when I know that there are children that are hungry, that SNAP benefits are being cut. all these policy pieces. We're against all of this. We're going to the polls because we need to make a difference, and we need to have people that will be elected that will represent the interests of the community. That's what I think all of this really boils down to, Santita. And I apologize for running on, but it was Hannah's fault. She got me all worked up with those numbers.
No. Well, I mean, no, but but I think, Hannah, if we heard the numbers while the government refused, while the administration, not the government, the administration refused to fund SNAP. And there's the contingency fund. They said, okay, it's $9 billion is supposed to be in it, only 5 to 6 were. You're going to cut a $20 billion check to Argentina. And you're going to gut the cattle farming industry in the United States. Talk to me, Hannah.
Exactly. And that $473 billion that's being used, that was our calculation through November 15th. So while the government was shut down, that funding could have paid fully funded SNAP benefits in all 5 of those cities for over a month. So we're seeing, while the Trump administration is fighting in court to keep troops on the ground, to keep troops from Texas in Chicago, while they're fighting court, they were also fighting in court to not fund SNAP. There was a judge that was saying you have to fully fund this, and they were saying they didn't want to use those contingency. So you're really seeing the priorities really laid bare of this administration. It's not an administration that wants to care for communities. It wants to militarize communities. And it's, again, all in service of an agenda that is hoping to disrupt us, to keep us disconnected, and to keep everything in service of billionaires and these war profiteers that they are also inviting into the government at this point as well. Many of them are actually taking, these tech billionaires are actually taking positions within the government. And so we have to just be very clear-eyed about this. And like Daryl had mentioned, there is an intimidation tactic being used here that we have to rise up against and understand clearly what it is and continue to resist in the many ways in which we can. One of them being through voting, but one of them being through being a sandwich guy or helping feed a neighbor during, whose benefits are being cut. There's so many ways, and it's really the time now where we have to pull together more than ever.
Well, I mean, tell me, why do you call this a regime, Daryl? I mean, we don't typically hear the American government described as such. We do that to everybody else. We don't do that to ourselves.
Right. Right. I think they have earned the title of regime because of the actions they're taking against their people, against their citizens. This is not a government that is trying to feed people. It's not a government that's trying to help people. It's not a government that's trying to build, brotherly love and sisterly love toward one another. It's very much the opposite. What a regime does is it wants to get in and it wants people to take a knee to the regime, to be afraid of one another, to be divisive with regards to its people, so that they can only be loyal to the king that's in place. Their number one loyalty would be to the king, not to one another in the streets, not to not one another in the neighborhood. That's what this regime has put forth, is that they want to turn neighbor against neighbor, for neighbor to turn the other person into the regime, into the king, to be dealt with, to say that this person, my neighbor might be undocumented, so come and get him, whether or not the person is undocumented or not. But the power of the regime is to say, we want all power. We want everyone loyal to us. That's what the regime is all about. That's what they're attempting to do. That's the reason that we have militarized, folks in the street trying to, I don't really know what in the world they're trying to do, whether they're trying to get undocumented folks, whether they're trying to get people that are citizens that have last names that are Hispanic sounding. Whatever it is that they're doing, they're turning folks against one another and making people feel insecure in their neighborhoods, and some insecure in their homes, to the point that in some of the Latino families, they don't want to come out of their home to go shopping because they're afraid of what they may run into. They get frightened to drive a car to go to work. All of this is emblematic of a government that's more of a regime than of a government. It's not of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's all for, by, and in favor of the oligarchy, for, by, and in favor of the regime. That's why I call it a regime, Santita.
Mm. What is the impact? I mean, I have to go back to, oh, I'm sorry, Hannah, go on.
No, I was going to say I completely agree with Daryl there. And I will say just one other thing too, is that all authoritarian regimes in history have positioned themselves as the unique saviors and have used these arguments around safety in order to advance their agendas, which are not, like Daryl said, about public safety. You know, the Nazi regime, it's about how the destruction of the Jewish population was required for German safety. You know, this is positioned as a public safety thing. So we need to be very also aware and cognizant of the arguments that are being put forward and not participate in building our own prison systems for ourselves, our communities, our neighbors, and understand, who is this actually in service of? And also, and understanding, right, like, how is defunding every single social service, which Americans are already getting few of when we compare ourselves to other economically advanced countries, how is that making us safer, and having troops on our street, you know, under the leadership of a convicted felon, with obviously a disgraced, you know, personal record in so many ways? How would that be safety, you know? And I think that's just really important to remember, that they will always argue that what they're doing is for our safety and security, and that is so far from the truth.
Well, I mean, how safe are we? Yes, I'm sorry, Daryl.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, there's safety in numbers, right? And that's why we see communities coming together to protect one another. There's safety in numbers. You know, one of the things that, and when we're talking about, you know, President Trump and the folks that are in the government there, one of the things I'm always very careful about is talking about his felony conviction and things like that. You know, the felony conviction does not you know, make it such that he can't be elected president, right? Doesn't make it that he's a bad person because he's had a felony. You know, but one of the things that we've got to be, you know, conscious of, I think, you know, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle, is encouraging people that are returning citizens to get involved in the system and be willing to vote, but use language that where we're saying, you know, but you shouldn't be president, but you shouldn't be elected. You know, it's an all or nothing proposition. So, you know, I'm very sensitive when we come to talking about folks that are returning citizens coming back into the system. Personally, I don't think you ever should be removed and lose your voting rights at all, as they do in Vermont, Maine, and the District of Columbia. You know, that you never lose your voting right. Even while you're incarcerated, you don't lose your voting rights. But I'm always very careful with regards to, you know, dealing with those that are court-impacted voters and court-impacted citizens, and being certain that we're not saying they should not be president, they should not be elected to office because of their standing and of their experience of what they've gone through. But, you know, overall, Santita, you know, Hannah and I are in complete agreement with regards to what this regime has done, and the fight that it's going to be to have voting rights going forward. You know, and I'll stop on this, one of the victories that we had this afternoon in Texas was that the federal court of Texas, U.S. Court of Appeals there, blocked the redistricting map that Texas had put in place regarding, you know, what President Trump wanted. So that's a victory right now. We'll see if it stands, but right now it certainly is a victory.
I'll say too, Daryl, I completely agree with you. I appreciate you making that point too, as well. And you're right. It's not about necessarily being a felony conviction. More on Trump's character, I guess I was more going towards, in terms of his corruption and sexual crimes. But I completely agree with you.
Well, I mean, I think all things can, I think all things can be true at the same time. You know, I don't think anyone is contradicting anyone. We have so much coming at us at the same time, it's disorienting. But I'm mindful of the fact that we're about to turn 250 years of age, the Republic is. And this is a pivotal moment for any republic, for any empire. The question is, will we stand or will we fall? I think country to not just survive but thrive, but we cannot do it. Dr. King said we would be heading towards spiritual death if we spent more money on military output than programs of social and spiritual uplift. Hannah, that is exactly what we're doing. You laid it out in terms of the budget. I mean, what we're doing, and I don't see us getting any bang for the buck. I mean, what do we in return? We've not won any conflict since the Second World War, and we were part of a coalition then. I mean, did we really win Grenada? Island. We were just trying to prove a point. I mean, we haven't won anything. Nothing.
Right.
And look at us, Hannah.
You're right.
This money is misspent. Would you not agree?
Yeah, and I mean, right, the triple evils that Dr. King wrote about too, the militarism, capitalism, and racism, which all again reinforce each other. The thing that dispels that is education, really. What when we learn from each other, about each other, and also like what actually is, helpful for our societies. And that's, of course, exactly what this regime, again, is defunding and banning books. And this is a very intentional attack on education and on knowing, on knowing our history, essentially, on knowing the history and the legacy of racism in this country. They're not even teaching that. And so it's very, very intentional, because if we did know better, like we were saying, if more people, and as a colleague of mine has written, actually, as more and more people across the country are learning what mass deportation actually means and what they're doing, it's extremely unpopular. People are not actually in favor of having their neighbors being kidnapped off the street. This is so. As people are understanding more and more, they're pushing back more and more. And again, not to overemphasize the electoral wins, but I will say, it was heartening to see some of the results of Election Day. We saw, for example, like in Pennsylvania, there was a billionaire, Jeff Yass, spending millions of dollars in order to unseat some of the Supreme Court justices and to reshape the political scene there. And despite huge coordinated, very well-funded dark money campaigns, all three of the Supreme Court justices there were able to retain their seats, and they were sitting on an agenda that supported abortion access, voting rights, statewide behavioral health services, paid sick leave. They all had, background supporting those things, and they were able to not be voted off by a billionaire-backed agenda. We saw in Georgia, two new members of the Public Service Commission win in Georgia and get a majority on that panel, which hasn't been seen in over 2 decades. And they ran on the platform that we need affordable energy and to stop raising energy prices for data centers for these tech companies that are just destroying the water and mass surveilling Americans and creating AI weaponry to kill children in Palestine. So we are seeing people clearly understanding these agendas that are being pushed by billionaires and corporations. And we are seeing folks come out and push back in the electoral stage, in the electoral fight. And I think that this coming year, we're going to have to do a lot more of that, a lot more organizing, a lot more educating, and a lot more coming together, because we really do have power in numbers, and there are more of us. And it really is just taking us getting together to fight back.
Yeah, and and bearing down Attorney Darrell Jones on the vote, but on the numbers. I think that if we told people how much where their money was going, if they understood that this government is the biggest business on earth, which is why when you see them wanting to privatize Social Security, the post office, all of that, those could be profitable businesses. It's just greed, and we're the ones who lose. And to me, that's enough for us to vote, but also to get very engaged in the process, Darrell.
Absolutely. And Santita, one of the things that Hannah was raising, and one of the things that I think you're going to be seeing happen occur in the 2026 election is making it plain, right? We're talking about affordability, and she's talking about the numbers and everything. But for voters, they like they like to put it where the goats can get it, right? All, down to the root, meaning that the top three issues that voters are going to be looking at are issues of affordability. They're going to be looking at, can I pay for my utilities, right? Am I able to pay for my groceries? Am I able to cover my rent and my mortgage that I have to pay? Those are going to be some of the top three issues that people are going to be dealing with. If we do a snapshot of what we've been talking about today, that's really what it comes down to, is that folks are going to be looking at the affordability. Can I afford to do this, 100, whatever the number is, $70 billion for deportation, rather than being able to afford my electric bill, which is off the charts right now? Can I afford these billions of dollars to do all this other stuff when I'm having difficulty putting groceries on the table and I've got to make my food stretch? $100 at the market only gets me a couple of pieces of food rather than being able to fill a cart. That type of thing. That's what I think you're going to see coming true in 2026. And then in the midst of all of that, you're going to be dealing with all this ICE stuff, and you're trying to arrest my neighbors and upsetting my schools and going into the schools and getting kids and following them home and deportation. It's too much. It's too much. And I think that's what we're going to see in 2026. I think that's where you're going to see the rise in people saying, I need to go to the polls. I need to be a voting rights champion. I need to just go and vote and encourage my family, friends, and neighbors to do the same. That's what I think you're going to see. You're going to see an attempt to suppress that vote, but I think you're going to see an even greater attempt of people coming out to be certain that they have the ability and exercise that right to vote, Santita.
Attorney Darrell Jones, of course, every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time on WOL in Washington, D.C., with Attorney Barbara Arnwine, the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. The last word belongs to you, Hannah Homestead, research analyst, national project of the Institute for Policy Studies. What do we need to know going forward in this increasingly polarized America, where I'm carrying my passport card every day and looking over my shoulder and watching people who are frightened? They're just frightened.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go back to my foreparents. The fears that my grandmother had when my father got involved in the civil rights movement. Boy, those people will kill you. Right? I mean, that's the kind of fear that Black people lived in the United States, in an apartheid America. That's what the dark-skinned Mexicans, who are indigenous people, they're really indigenous people who speak Spanish. Let's keep it 100. Mm-hmm. They're about as Spanish as I am English. We speak the language of our conquerors, right? I mean, help me to understand what we need to know. Because as I read your work, and as I think about the implications of having a militarized country, it is unsettling to me. We're supposed to take a knee to them. I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm supposed to be in charge of you, but now you're in charge of me. What's happening here, Hannah? What do we need to do?
I appreciate that big question. Also, I just want to say it's just an honor to be here with you and with Darrell, because of the work you all are doing this work, and it's critical to get these messages out here, to be doing this, fighting for our communities, and in this environment, in this media landscape that is also part of the problem. It's owned by corporate interests, and a lot of the reason why we actually are so ignorant as a public on this kind of stuff is because it's not being talked about in a clear and transparent way a lot of times. So the work that they're doing is really, really critical. I've been really into, the fights we have in front of us are also impacting the global stage as well, right? And so I think that if we are the whole thinking globally but acting locally, like our fights against AI data centers in our communities is not only just for our communities and our water and our health, it's also against these oligarchic leaders that are profiting off of genocide abroad. And so I think that if we, our fights against mass deportation are for our neighbors and for the kind of communities that we want to be living and thriving in, all of us, which are safe, which are just, and which provide for everybody. So I think that, there's so many ways to get involved. If there's ways to get involved against militarism locally, whether that's fighting data centers, whether that's, like there's military production happening all across this country as well, and efforts to stop that. There are very toxic effects on communities. We know from PFAS contamination through all sorts of other things. But I think honestly, just getting to know our neighbors and joining in local fights. I think the fight is local now. It's of course calling your representatives to tell them to not vote for legislation that criminalizes people, that funds this endless war at home and abroad, endless climate collapse, endless poverty at home and abroad. Yes, that's important and critical, and that's kind of bare minimum at this point, though. We really need to be, I think, getting involved locally in our communities in whatever ways there is. There's tons of Know Your Rights trainings, and there's tons of ways to really be holding our local leaders accountable, and that can really transform and amplify our movements nationally, which is, and also how we survive, and also it's important. It builds our community bonds, and that really gives us the strength to keep fighting under even unimaginable conditions, as we're seeing people fighting all over the world in extremely difficult conditions, and they're still fighting for their communities and for their safety and their kids. And so I think that it really is for all of us to just engage as much as we can with that. I guess that would be my answer.
And they're winning. And, and when they fight Hannah, they win.
Yeah, they're winning.
You're guaranteed to lose my father's. Yeah. No,
Sorry.
Please.
No, there are wins happening.
No, please go. No.
There's wins happening across the, there's wins happening, like Daryl mentioned, in kicking ice out of communities and saving people that were getting swept up in these mass raids. There are, teachers are locking hands and not letting ICE into schools. There are data centers that are being, shut down or having to not allowed to be built. There's detention centers that are being challenged. I think the biggest thing too, Daryl had said earlier, is that this regime really relies on us, our complicity, our fear, and our not fighting them, just letting them come in and do what they want to. And I think we need to join the fight together. We need to contribute in whatever ways that we can individually. We all have something to give. And so I think it really is this moment is really going to ask all of us a little bit more from all of us. And I think it's our job right now to really sit with that and to join and to say what's demanding from us at this moment, and then to give it.
Well, and we have it to give. I mean, and the names of the concerns with which you work really say it all. The Transformative Justice Coalition. We can be transformed, and we can create a just society and a peaceful world. We can do that. And we must examine our priorities. As we get older, as we mature, that's one of the beauties of maturation. You get your priorities together and everything else falls away. You really do not want to have dessert before you have dinner. Really, really, really we need to look at our budget. What did you say?
Oh, we also have such legacy, of I would say your family is a big part of that, but we have leaders, and we have leaders, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants that have come through unimaginable circumstances before us and have paved the way. And so I think that there's this kind of, or I hear sometimes, this echoes of despair sometimes from folks. And I think we just need to remember that we've been, and people have been facing atrocities at huge scales in the past and currently, and there's always a fight. We need to continue to gain strength from the legacies of the folks that have come before us and have fought and have won. and put that really into practice now, and really continue to carry forward that tradition.
Well, amen to that. But I will say we all stand on the shoulders of giants, because if we knew our family stories, we would have so much respect and admiration for our ancestors, because they went through so much to get us here. So let's respect that. Let's move this American project, this human project forward, everybody. Let's get our priorities straight, and let's transform this great country and this world so that it reflects the heavenly idea that the Creator gave us in the first place. I am Santita Jackson on behalf of Daryl Jones and Hannah Homestead. God bless you, everybody. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. Mwah. Thank you all for such a wonderful show.
Thank you so much, Santita.
Thank you so much, Santita. And yeah, it was such
Thank you.
Great meeting you, Hannah.
It was so great meeting you. Thank you for everything you do, both of you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Really great.
Girl, thank you for what you do. I read her all the time, and I'm so glad to have Hannah. And just really, I can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. I
Because
can't wait.
because I think ICE is. Oh, look, I've said we've had this delay all day, and I've been having trouble with StreamYard. I think it's because of what we're talking about. I really do. Call me paranoid. I am. But my parents worked for Dr. King. I think I learned that right. The things I've seen. I trust no one. I trust nothing. I just don't trust it.
ICE, no, I believe that. We're going to be working a little bit more on ICE too coming up. So we'll keep you. We'll send you our. We're going to look into the military contractors that are profiting from ICE. That's kind of one of our next projects. So we'll definitely share this. We have that ready. Yeah.
Wow.
Please, I want to have you on this show and the Keep Hope Alive show. Reverend Jackson's, well, obviously I host it and I produce it and write it. But I'd love to have you on to talk about these issues. Because while we are marching and talking, we need to know just how much money we're spending. I think that if we knew how much money we were spending it relative to everything else, we'd be appalled. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we demand that change. Because everybody's got a budget, or at least you should. And when you cut back, you go, wait a minute, really? I'm spending all this money here. Why? What am I getting back for it? You're not getting anything. But some people, Elon Musk is a military contractor.
Yes.
That Palantir, that's what Peter Thiel is. They do it. Okay, I get it. It's just not helping us.
Right.
It's
not helping us at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. So I'm sending you all much love. I'm going to run to this hospital so I can see my dad, give him a kiss. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh. Hope that he heals up well, and hope that you all stay well.
And let him know we're praying.
God has been so good. And you know what? And I'm going to reach out to you tomorrow. Daryl, let me know how early you could talk about Texas.
Okay. Yeah,
because I just saw that before we came on.
Yeah, no, just let me know. I may be in town this weekend, too, and I'll let you know.
Oh, great. But I'd like to do it tomorrow. I'm trying to plan out these shows. It gives me a chance to really, I'm trying to knock things out early so I can go to the hospital.
Yep, no problem. Just let me know what time. I'll make myself available.
I appreciate it. Hannah, let me know about this project so I can get you back on.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. This is really a privilege. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Have a good evening.
No, thank you. This was my privilege. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.